Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Northeastern at Noon, where, as you can see from the slide, the topic is going to be the ever-changing business of sports. How many of you follow sports, but only when that particular sport is in season? A few. How many of you follow sports all year long? Much more. Well, I'm sure you folks are well aware, when you follow a sport in the off-season particularly, that sports is fundamentally a business. What with all the franchise shifts, stadium issues, player disputes, both individual and collectively, and on and on. I also suspect that even those of you who may just seasonally follow a sport are at least aware in the background that business is involved. What from suffering through all the beer commercials as you watch the game, through the fact that if you try to attend a game, the ticket prices seem to be ever escalating. Well, to give us some insight and some interesting examples of the business aspect of sports, we're pleased to have with us today Professor Roger Abrams. He's currently the Richardson Professor of Law here at Northeastern. He's a graduate of Cornell University as well as Harvard Law School, and at Harvard he served as Visiting Professor of Law in 2006. Previous to that, he seemed to enjoy the position of University Dean, having been a dean at Northeastern from 1999 to 2002, and before that, a dean at Rutgers Law School, and before that, dean at Nova University School of Law, beginning back in 1986. He began his academic life in 1974 as a faculty member of Case Western Reserves. And previous to that, he practiced labor law right here in Boston, as well as being a law clerk at the First Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, this is all very laudable and interesting, but what does it have to do with sports? Well, he happens to be the author of 5 books on the law, economics, and social history of the sports industry. And in addition, he's authored or co-authored more than 40 law review articles on labor arbitration and other legal issues, including sports law, in the law journals of Harvard, Michigan, and Duke universities. Further, in 2006, he served as the very first scholar-in-residence at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown. Lastly, I have to note that in his 40 years as a labor arbitrator, Professor Abrams has been appointed to resolve more than 2,200 disputes, including many Major League Baseball salary arbitration cases. So, now that we know that background, let's give a warm welcome to Professor Roger Abrams.
Well, after that introduction, I think I ought to just sit down. That's very nice. Thank you, Tom. Growing up, we all played games. We did. Some of them had rules. Most of them we made up at the time, those rules, and we would change them if they didn't seem fair, especially if we were losing. And that's how games began, and go back to ancient human history. As I was teaching my sports law class yesterday, I was trying to explain that sports is preparation for the hunt. Develop eye-hand coordination, because you either got good at it or you starved. Today, certainly in the professional ranks, no one's starving. They're doing fine, and every so often they actually win at what they do and earn more money. This game business, this diversion, as some people see it, is big business. My current estimate is that the value worldwide on an annual income basis is sports earns $700 billion a year. Some game. Nice to be a part of it. And I can just sit in my office and write about it, and which is, of course, to the jealous observation of my colleagues on the faculty who have to write about real things. I thought this afternoon we'd go back into history and see how the $700 billion enterprise really began. And an important part of that history took place on our campus. As we will see, the first World Series was played on what is now Northeastern. It goes back to this lovely old lithograph to show you the first baseball game. In the 1840s in New York, lots of young men who either were immigrants or came in from the countryside who took white-collar jobs wanted to do something after work. And so whether at Madison Square or other open areas, they would take a ball and throw it around, which, as you might imagine, got boring after a while, just throwing around the ball. Plus, the railroads had discovered Madison Square and bought all the territory and threw out all the ball players. And so these social groups of young men decided they needed a more organized activity. And so they created a committee. It sounds like something the law faculty would do. Immediately create a committee. And the committee's job was to write rules for their game of baseball. 2 words, baseball. The committee created for this social club, which was known as the Knickerbockers, a first set of rules. And the rules, again, which I taught to my students yesterday, are remarkably prescient in terms of how it became baseball today. If you saw the game on June 17th, 1846, that was played there on the heights of Hoboken, New Jersey. They had to go to New Jersey because there was not enough room in New York. But it was easy back then. You didn't have the George Washington Bridge or Holland Tunnel, let alone the Lincoln Tunnel. You took the ferry. You just jumped on the ferry and paid a couple of pennies, and you were there at the heights. They created that game. And it does look like our game today, with some notable differences. If you look at the lithograph, notice that the pitcher is not pitching from a mound. They wouldn't add the mound until later on in the century in order to help the field drain. They couldn't figure out a way to stop the rain. And the defensive players were standing on their base. There's the first baseman standing on first, second baseman on second, third baseman on third, and there's one guy in a little bit, so they called him a shortstop. It took them a while to realize they didn't have to stand on their base. The game developed. Underhanded pitching slowly moved to sidearm pitching, and by the 1880s, they were pitching overhand, and sometimes very fast. By the 1890s, it was estimated that pitchers were throwing in the mid-90s for their fastballs. The mound was slowly to take its place on the field, and the pitchers would slowly be moved back to its current 60 feet 6 inches. Why such a strange amount? They just mismeasured. But, that happens too. Even in our wonderful engineering school. They sometimes mismeasure. We do it all the time in the law school. And so the Knickerbockers created this game. The only problem was there was no one else to play, and competition is an essential part of the American character, and that included these white-collar workers from New York. There had been former members, however, of the Knickerbocker Club who had since gone on to spending more time at work, and they were invited to constitute what was called the New York Nine for this first game. And the retired players destroyed the current Knickerbocker top nine in the first game. The Knickerbockers weren't sure this was a good idea. They published a set of rules. They distributed. They got an important place in American baseball history. And then they concentrated on the far more important thing about baseball, which was the dinner which followed the baseball game. And clubs were known by the quality of what they put on the table, with drink, of course, included. The game began as an outgrowth of the need and desire of people brought into the urban environment without connections, sometimes immigrants, sometimes from the countryside, for some social center that would bring them together. The Knickerbockers had 150, 200 members. And they would have a whole series of teams, the first nine, the second nine, third nine, keep counting. And you could move up within the Knickerbocker hierarchy the better you got at this game. The game looked a lot like what we have today. 3 strikes, you're out. Why 3? I don't know. Distance between the bases, they measured it between home and second, it was 42 paces. And from first to third, it was 42 paces. If you figure out the average length of someone's pace at that day, it turns out to be almost exactly 90 feet from home to first. How did they know? I have no idea. Because as you know, if it's 91 feet or 92 feet, player's always going to be out because the infielder will pick up the ball, throw it to first, he's out. And if it was 88 or 87 feet, no one would get out. 90 is perfect, which is generally the way I feel about baseball. It's pretty good at what it does, which is to involve us from the age of our personal enlightenment and when we could play sports until the end of our days. It's whether we can play or not play, we always think we could play. And that shortstop is making how many millions of dollars? I could have muffed that for far less than that. The ever-changing business of sports. Here are the Knickerbockers. In one of their social times, to give you a sense of who these people are. Were there ball games before this first baseball game? Yes, here in Boston, of course. We're sure we invented everything, and probably did. We had a version of the game known as town ball. It was played on the Boston Common. Its unique feature was, no, you didn't tag the opposing player or force him out by throwing the ball to the base that he had to go to before he could get there. They would throw the ball at him. It was called soaking. And the one thing that the creators of the Knickerbocker rules were sure of, in fact, they have a provision in it saying no soaking allowed. They weren't tough enough to deal with this soaking business. You could get an out simply by virtue of catching the ball, like you can now. But they also had a provision which said you could get an out by catching the ball on one bounce. Why on a bounce? Well, remember, none of the players had gloves. This is before gloves. And someone said, we ought to have some sort of gloves. So they took gloves and cut off the fingers so they could have feel of the ball. And they took mittens to do that. And once they did that, they called them mittens or mitts, as we call them today. From the sublime to the ridiculous, Deflategate. I don't know if anyone noticed, just a couple days ago, we celebrated our 500-day anniversary of the start of Deflategate, and it ain't over yet. It is not my plan to go through the gruesome details. On the other hand, in the time, and there will be time for questions, I'll be delighted to answer any question you want about Deflategate. I speak on behalf of Tom Brady and others about this. See, it's deflated. If it looked like that, then I'd raise some questions. It doesn't look like that. Rather, let's focus on a few highlights of this changing business of sports. There was one dramatic event that changed sports for all time. And it was not the result of a Supreme Court decision. It was not the result of the joining together of two rival baseball leagues, the American League and the National League, in 1903. It was the result of a deal. Jackie Robinson. Robinson was extraordinary. And so too was Branch Rickey, then owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, long time administrator. He even played some ball in his earlier years in the National League, played for St. Louis, did some coaching at the University of Michigan while he was taking his law degree at the University of Michigan. Lawyers played a role in the changing of what was baseball. Together, they ended apartheid in the National Pastime. What a different time. What a terrible time it was. Wesley Branch Rickey, a devout, religious, adherent, throughout his long career, coaching and otherwise, and playing. He never played on Sunday, never was involved on Sunday, and kept to it. But he fought the powers that be for the right to bring baseball to its current diverse reflection of the nature of American and, in fact, world society. This is 1947. This is 7 years before Brown versus Board of Education. That's remarkable that it would occur. He brought his plan to the then commissioner of baseball, known as Happy. His name was Happy Chandler, former senator from Kentucky, and which would not have suggested much promise to this idea. And he went to the commissioner and said, "Commissioner, this is what I plan to do." And Chandler said, "Can the guy play?" And Rickey said, "Yeah, he can play." He said, "Well, I'll support you." And so he too deserves part of the credit for changing. Baseball, the major league owners met. They voted 15-1 against dismantling apartheid in baseball, but there was only one vote that counted, and that was the commissioner. And the rest, as we know, is history. Today, of course, you can no longer say that baseball is our national pastime. It seems to last a long time. It lasts longer when the Red Sox finished last. It seems to be zooming by now that the Red Sox are two games ahead, which is rather extraordinary. And of course, baseball is a year-round activity. So too is football. And many more people find football to be consistent with their aggressive nature. You can't vote for football, but you can vote for Donald Trump, I guess. Well, it's one and the same. And anyway, Trump is yet to cause anyone concussions, I think. But we'll see. The football began long after baseball. There's the famous game between Rutgers and Princeton in 1869, where there is a story that a professor from Rutgers happened by these group of college boys who were playing what they later claimed was the first football game, and he shook his umbrella at them and said, "You will come to no good Christian end." And he was right, of course. They came to no good Christian end. They just beat up each other, and Rutgers prevailed. Since I'm a former dean at Rutgers Law School, I'm kind of proud of that. But the game was still a very amateur activity. And while it took root in many colleges, it was not an official college activity. These were, again, social clubs. Kids who got together and said, "We will challenge you." And the challenge matches did proceed. There were some instances of players of particular quality who were slipped some money under the table to participate on behalf of our hometown here in western Pennsylvania, where a lot of this took place. But it was not until 1920 that the Shield was created. The Shield was not created in 1920, but the same feeling for the Shield. At a Hupmobile showroom in Canton, Ohio, on September 17th, 1920, there it is. There's the Hupmobile showroom. A number of the leaders of these professional clubs, mostly from Ohio, Canton, Akron, Cleveland, Massillon, go through the list, and then later from out of state, from northeastern Indiana, some from Michigan, others from western Pennsylvania, got together and formed the National Football League. Not quite as we know it today, but certainly the first time that it began. And it began, although it was never quite as popular as college football. And in some parts of the country, college football remains far more popular. I was doing an arbitration case in Lake City, Florida, last summer, when I was chatting with some of the grievance during a break, and they wanted to know, well, who do I root for? And I said, well, I root for the Patriots. They said, the who? They said, well, no. Who do you like, Auburn or Alabama? And I quickly had to choose sides. I tried to size up which one they would prefer. I said Alabama, and they said, good. I guess we were closer to Alabama. But in any case, for many people, college football remains their primary social activity during the fall. And as you know, the NFL also continues year-round. We're going to televise the draft. I just hope they televise the next set of collective bargaining negotiations. Now, that would be fun. I may be the only one watching it. That's fine. But I will tape it. I'll use it in my class as to how not to operate collective bargaining because they haven't figured out how to do that. What they have figured out how to do is how to make that golden goose lay the golden eggs with an annual bottom line of $12.5 billion, most of which was a result of this guy's activities. Pete Rozelle, who was commissioner of football, comes from the business side. I don't know if he ever did play a game, ever. but was a real PR guy from publicity through the Los Angeles Rams. He was probably the most remarkable commissioner of all times in all sports. But what Pete Rozelle did with regard to the NFL is he was able to convince the owners of the big market teams, of the New York Football Giants, the Chicago Bears, the LA Rams, those that could produce an increment of income simply by virtue of the fact that they were in a big market and could sell their own television rights to local stations at a higher amount. Rozelle said, look, we'll all make more money if we do, he did not use this term, the socialist thing. Let's take the whole league, which now has 32 clubs, back then there were fewer, and let's write a single arrangement with the television networks, then there were only 3 networks, to televise our games, and we will split it equally. Equally. That's socialism. That was fine. He didn't announce it that way, but that's what he did. And so since he was able to monopolize the production of the product, that is, you want the Rams? I'll give you the Rams, but you got to take the Steelers as well. And frankly, they were delighted to get the Steelers as well. He also created the Sunday doubleheader. And so you knew there was your game on, and then, gee, I could use some more football. And so you stayed. Pete would have loved what they've done now with, let's see, there's Thursday night, Sunday, and then Sunday, and then Monday, and it's Thursday during the day on Thanksgiving. It's wall to wall. And if you happen to miss any of those games, just check the NFL Network. They'll replay it for you. It's all there. The beauty of professional sports entertainment is that it has to be watched live. As opposed to everything else on television, the 300 channels we have, where you can just put it in your DVR and watch it at your convenience. They won't reschedule the Patriots game at your convenience. But you can do it, everything else on DVR, you can't do it with sports. I don't know if Rozelle fully appreciated all this was going to happen, but it has. And that's why they keep earning all money. It would have been grand to go on to the future under this kind of regime, and the players would come and the players would go. Average football player in the National Football League has about a career of 3.3 years. So they do go. And then, of course, they suffer from what they've experienced. But no more suffering that can be brought about by this man. The employees, I know, they're stars. They might be stars, but they're still employees, formed a union. How strange. And here in baseball, there was the greatest sports union leader. That's Marvin Miller. Miller, an economist from Brooklyn, had nothing in common with professional baseball players. No more different animals. He converted what was a fraternal organization of players into the strongest trade union in America. And the way he did it was really interesting. He was the executive committee, the Major League Baseball Players Association, agreed to have Miller be their first executive director. He said, no, not unless each team votes to have me as the executive director. And he went around in the spring training camps and met with the players. Well, the coaches and the manager and the general manager, not sure quite what to make of this animal, said, we're going to come to the meetings too. could you imagine at the local union hall telling the story about how the supervisors all wanted to be in on our meetings. Yeah, right. That's not unionization. That's baseball. And they did come, and the players overwhelmingly voted for Miller. And I'm told that even some of the supervisors voted for Miller as well, saying, wait a minute, these guys can't be a union, like a real union. They're ball players. What do they do for a living? They catch grounders, or maybe hit doubles off the wall, at Fenway Park, which apparently is only about 10 feet behind shortstop. And so they didn't know what was happening. When Marvin Miller hit them with what was happening, the owners, frankly, could not believe it. You guys are going to what? Strike? Well, if you're going to strike, then what can we do? We can lock out. And it took 8 work stoppages over the next 20 years, more than 20 years, for the parties to realize this is no way to run a railroad, let alone Major League Baseball. I think in large part that was because Marvin Miller was a pain in the ass to deal with. He was. But also because the owners could not possibly believe that their pampered, they were not being paid the salaries they are today, their pampered elite ball players could have solidarity. But they did. These are young men who are extraordinarily talented. I know a couple of people who have played minor league baseball, some of whom come to law school shortly after realizing that their knee won't work anymore, or both knees won't work anymore. These were great players. In high school, I saw some of them play who would make it through the minor leagues. Only 1 out of 14 players who make it to a minor league level, whether it's A, AA, AAA, ever make it to the major leagues, even for a cup of coffee, as they say, even if they're up and they don't get a chance to bat or pitch. Those are very long odds among this extraordinarily talented group of athletes. So they knew their chances were slim, but if they made it, they wanted to make sure they had a fair shake. And Miller was there to talk for them. Here he is talking in front of a group of players in spring training. And so it's a cold winter in Springfield that may be unnecessarily duplicative, because it's normally a cold winter in Springfield. And Dr. James Naismith, Canadian, has come down to Springfield College, which met at the YMCA. Note that Northeastern University began at the YMCA with the founding in 1896 of the law school at the YMCA, and then the university grew from it. So I can feel for what Naismith was dealing with. Our students are very well behaved. His students were not very well behaved. And the dean of the university told Naismith, "We've got to find something for these kids to do during the long winter. Spring, summer, fall, that's fine, but winter's too much." So Naismith invented the game of basketball. I mean, he literally sat down and invented the game of basketball. There he is with his peach basket and the ball. There are the peach baskets. He had the janitor nail them up. Those old gyms used to have a track around the second floor? Well, that track just happened to be 10 feet off the floor. That's why the baskets are 10 feet off the floor today. Nailed them up. The game was played. Someone made a basket. The time was called. Why was time called? Well, the ball's up there in the basket. And so the janitor had to come out with the ladder and climb up and get the ball out of the basket, and then they would have a jump ball to see who would get the next chance to throw the ball into the basket. Someone at some point explained to Naismith, you got to cut a hole in the basket. And he did cut a hole in the basket. He invented basketball in 1891. These are the women at Smith who figured out this is a good activity for women in college as well, and they played it first in 1892. Today, basketball is the second most popular sport in the world, and it was invented down the pike. If you have not been to the Hall of Fame, either baseball or basketball, I encourage you. Basketball's first, then keep going, and you'll make it to Cooperstown, which is lovely this time of year. And so you could learn about these sports firsthand. The World Series of 1903. And so I am walking to the tee from my office at the law school at Northeastern, and there is a plaque on the wall. And the plaque says, on this site, in 1903 was held the first World Series. I literally did not know that, even when I came to interview for the deanship. And I said, this is good. First of all, it's a good omen that I'm in the right place. And second of all, there's a story to tell about what happened here. And here's the story. There's the Huntington Avenue grounds. The Huntington Avenue grounds go from Huntington up here in front, with the side road being Forsyth, where, I don't know if you ever hear of Chicken Lou's. Chicken Lou's is right there on Forsyth, near where you would go buy your tickets to get in. The American League and National League fought for 2 seasons until the National League, which had existed for 25 years, gave up and said, okay, we don't want to fight anymore over paying players. You've stolen all our great players. They did. And we can make a lot more money if we don't fight. They signed what was called the Cincinnati Peace Agreement, which basically said, we'll do what you want to do, as long as we can have a reserve system, which will allow us to keep our own players. And they played the 1903 season together. Season ended, and what do we do now? Well, the season ended in September. There's plenty of time to play some baseball. But they looked at the peace agreement. It doesn't say what we do after the season's over. Barney Dreyfus, a German-Jewish immigrant who settled in Pittsburgh and was told by his doctor, get more fresh air, and got involved with the ownership of the Pittsburgh club, then known as the Pirates, because they were always accused of stealing players from other teams, which they did. And Barney Dreyfus writes a note to the owner of the Boston club, then known as the Boston Americans. Sometimes they are wrongfully referred to as the Boston Pilgrims. They were not. They certainly were not the Boston Red Sox. Back then, that would take a couple more years to get to their current name. It was John I. Young. His father owned and published the Boston Globe. John I. never did anything of value, so his father bought him a club. And so he became the owner of the Boston Club during the year when they were great. Well, of course they're great. They have Cy Young pitching, which is why we have Cy Young statue in the middle of the campus. And a number of other eventual Hall of Famers. The owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, Dreyfus, said, I challenge you to a series of the best of 9 games in what we will call the World Series. The world apparently extended from Boston to Pittsburgh. Or if you count the team that didn't quite make it, St. Louis. That's the whole world. Nothing in the South, nothing in the West. It's presumptuous. It's American in its best form. John I. said, sure, we'll do it. We'll start here in Boston. And they did start in Boston. The first game, the Cy Young pitching, the Boston's lost. Um, and the second game, the Boston's lost. This is trouble. Because if it's best out of 9, so if you lose 5, you've had it. They built this stadium in 1901. It took them a couple of weeks to build it. You can see it's mostly wood, which is really cheap and really easy to build. The problem is it burns down. It didn't burn down during that series, but the South End grounds, you can make it out if you get close to this. On the other side of Rozelle Station was the South End grounds where the Boston's National League team played. But there was this huge open field, which was used for traveling circuses and the like. Later, when the Bostons move over to Fenway Park, and of course they didn't need the Huntington Avenue grounds, we bought it. Northeastern University bought it. This is our campus, where the first World Series was played. My office is 50 feet from the ticket office. It's perfect, just perfect. We lost the third game as well. A lot of people came out here climbing the walls and these games were expensive. They were 50 cents each, which is basically what a working person would make in a day. You think the current tickets are expensive? These were expensive tickets. The Boston team had supporters that were called the Royal Rooters. When there wasn't enough room for them in the stands, they made room for them on the field. The Royal Rooters were led by a 5-foot impish kind of guy who ran the local saloon. It was Nuff Said McGreevy. Nuff Said McGreevy got his name. He was, I'd like to think of him as an early arbitrator, because he would end disputes in his bar by saying, "Nuff said." I don't know how he ruled, but that was it, and that's what they call him, Nuff Said McGreevy. And here's his bar, the Third Base Saloon, which was on what was called the Avenue at the time, which is now Columbus Avenue. And it was gorgeous. And this whole collection of stuff, which of course came down during Prohibition, is held by the Boston Public Library now. So you can go and visit it as well. They kept losing. They went to Pittsburgh, Exposition Park in the Steel City. The Americans, that is our team, was failing. The only thing interesting about Exposition Park, which is no longer there, is that whenever it would rain a little bit in Pittsburgh, the whole park would get flooded. They hadn't figured out this drainage stuff yet. But the Rooters, who came with the team on aboard the train, saved the Bostons. What happened? Here it is. McGreevy, who of course was leading the band, rented a band to come out and play support that the Rooters would then sing. And so he sent a couple of his people out to get music. You couldn't get a CD back then. What you got was sheet music. And they picked up the latest hit song from Broadway called Tessie. Tessie, I love you kind of stuff. And nonsense. But the Rooters kept singing it over and over and over. And finally, the Bostons responded with hits and doubles, and not a lot of home runs back then. The balls were kind of squishy after a while, but they kept winning, and they triumphed over the Pittsburgh Pirates. Here they are, both teams lined up for the same picture, and if you see way in the back here towards the middle, this little guy is Nuff Said McGreevy, who figured he deserves some of the credit for winning the World Series. If you want more information on the World Series, I've written a book. There's me and Cy on campus, and it's called The First World Series. I was interested. The games are interesting, and I talk about the games. What I find even more interesting is who was there at the games. Sure, there was the Irish from the South End, who by that time very much controlled the city bureaucracy, the police department, city officials as well. There were immigrants right off the boat. Any of you remember Bunny Solomon, trustee of the university, since passed away? Bunny and I were friends while I was dean, and I told Bunny about this book that I was writing about the first World Series, and he said, "Oh, you know, my father went to that World Series." And so I have a whole chapter about Bunny Solomon and his family coming off the boat from Eastern Europe and going right to the ballpark. Because if you're going to learn to be an American, you have to learn baseball. That seemed essential. And there's a rain check from the first World Series and a picture of the owner of Pittsburgh. And so, with the help of Tessie, they came back and won the World Series, 5-3, giving Boston the first World Championship. The ever-changing business of sports. It has changed from a kid's game, but it's still a kid's game. From a pastime to what is now an obsession for many people. It's not what life could be. It is what life is. There it is. It keeps moving. And I will take your questions. Thanks for coming. Yes, ma'am. Abner Doubleday. Abner Doubleday in 1837, living in Cooperstown, sketched out the diamond, which was the key to the game, and was forever ordained to be the inventor of baseball. It never happened. In 1837, Abner Doubleday was at West Point, where he was studying to be an officer, and indeed he was an officer. He was famous as being in command at Fort Sumter, and was the first, which was the first battle in Charleston Harbor of the Civil War. And so when baseball needed some explanation as to why this was a Native American game, they elevated him. He had great PR. But he has no plaque in the Hall of Fame because he didn't do anything involving baseball. Other questions, please. No one wants to know about Deflategate? Not a bit. Nope. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not a fan, but our last name is Bruins.
Ooh.
You didn't mention hockey.
You know, I didn't mention hockey because in large measure until well into the 20th century, hockey was a purely Canadian sport and was played on the ponds up across the border. And when the league began, the original 6, could you imagine starting a league with only 6 clubs? 4 of those 6 clubs were American clubs because there was a market for those clubs. And then in one year they decided to double their size, and now it's become a truly national game. I don't think it yet has the stature of basketball, football, and baseball. On the other hand, it's a great game. Doesn't televise very well, but it's terrific when you're there in person. It's the fastest game on ice. Questions? Any? Sir?
You mentioned what your views are on the repetitive head injuries of football players.
The head injuries of football players. Don't let your son grow up to be a football player, or your grandson. It is extraordinarily dangerous. We're going to learn more over the coming years, but now they know for sure that at least 30% of all persons who play this game, play it in accordance with the rules, will end up with debilitating injuries over the length of their life. People who play NFL football at that speed, those very large and very quick men, are are losing are losing 3 years of their lifespan for every year they play in the NFL. Do they know that? Sure they know that. Is it worth it? I don't know. You make your choice. Will the billion-dollar settlement of the concussion suits provide enough money? Unlikely. But at least the NFL stood up and said, we will do something without admitting we did anything wrong. I don't know if they did anything wrong. I don't know if the game can be played without those injuries. You can do certain things. No particular reason why the linemen, who are the ones who get injured the most, have to be in three-point stances, which ensures they're going to hit their head you do it standing up like they do in arena football. Fewer injuries there. There are ways to decrease but not eliminate the injuries, but for sure they will continue. Will the game stop as a result of these injuries? One problem, of course, is that these players who are so debilitated, physically, mentally, emotionally, and the like, are never in the public view when that happens. We don't see them being injured. We hear about it more, but not enough. And so I think it's going to take someone dying during a game for something to happen. I hope that does not happen because, frankly, for most Americans, it's just a wonderful thing to do in the fall and winter, as long as you inflate your footballs. Questions, sir?
What are the avenues for a 20-year-old to get into the business of sport?
There are some. There for undergraduates, there are sports management programs. I'm not sure that we have one at Northeastern, but we certainly should, which introduces the students to the structures of the sport and the business issues that arise in terms of franchising and building facilities and the like. When you're a student at Northeastern, of course, as you know, you have the advantage of co-op, and there are lots of our undergraduates who do co-ops for the Red Sox and the Kraft organization. I always recommend that students who are about 20 and thinking about entering the sports business go to law school, because that certainly helps. Helps you break in. When you have a business, which is not limited to what goes on Sunday afternoon, but includes apparel and travel and medicine and 25 other sneakers, New Balance. There are those jobs that are available, and co-op is a good way to start. Questions? Ma'am.
Yes, it's interesting. You didn't mention the #1 sport of the world, which would be.
Oh yes, well I was going to ask you. but first, to get the answer of the #1 sport in the world, what's the #3 sport in the world? It's blank, basketball, blank. Give me the last blank. What? And this is a surprise. What? I'm sorry? No, well, soccer is #1, or what is appropriately called football everywhere else, as opposed to here where we call it soccer. Third most popular sport, rugby. Rugby would be a good choice. Nope. Well, it's cricket. Indeed, it is cricket. Thank you, British Empire. It had people playing this cricket. There's one British author in the 19th century said, the British do not have a great sense of eternity, which was why they invented cricket. Could you imagine how many? This is the third day that we're playing this match. Enough already. And soccer is extraordinary in terms of its reach. As long as most of the people who run the organization, FIFA, stay out of jail, which is most unlikely. I am working with one of our criminal law professors, preparing for the trials, which are going to take place in the U.S. of all the miscreants who have been stealing money. Billions or so it seems. Further questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, the Deflategate. Well, what would you like to know? You know, for something that never happened, it has had a long life to it, and now it's taken on a whole different aspect to it. I can recommend lots of interesting things to read. Dan Goldberg, who's a just terrific lawyer in downtown Boston, came to my class last quarter to talk about sports lawyering in real life. He wrote and writes everything that the Kraft organization sends out for the Patriots. Now, of course, it's become a fight in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals between what's the power of the commissioner. They keep on calling him an arbitrator. He's not an arbitrator. He's a management official. Maybe a good one, bad one, who cares? The question is, did they have the power to do this, or was his decision arbitrary and capricious? If it was, which I kind of think it was, then it should be overturned in court. But everyone else involved calls him an arbitrator. And while I like arbitrators, and I've been doing this arbitrating stuff for 42 years, he was not. What's going to happen? I think the Second Circuit is not going to accept the request to consider this again en banc, that is, all 13 judges. There's some good lawyers on Brady's side. They will file what's called a petition for certiorari with the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will decline to take it. The question is whether any of this will happen in time for the first game this fall, and I'm praying for a stay because I'd like to watch football. Sir?
Why?
That's the best. You know, there's my students, if they would only learn that that's the question.
Why are we holding the trials for FIFA in this country rather than the 99% of the rest of the world that think soccer is important?
Well, it's because we don't think it's important. And those who think it's important, like the UK and France and Italy and the rest, they're scared. They wouldn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. And the only one who is ready to go after them is the U.S. Justice Department. God bless them. There has to be a connection to the United States and most of the illegal money. These are bribes that are paid by various television people to get the right to televise pro soccer here and there. There was a lot of money being passed around, and it all went through U.S. banks. That's the nexus. That's the connection to the U.S. That's enough. Good. Further questions, sir?
From your view, do you think the Olympics will continue as they are in years to come?
Well, I'm a little worried about the Olympics this summer. If you're going to Rio, bring your bug spray, okay? I had yesterday in my class, my PowerPoint, which had the two most evil players in sports today. I had Sepp Blatter from FIFA. And then the second one, I had a mosquito. With Zika, it's going to be nasty. It simply does not pay to hold the Olympics. No one who was associated with Boston's ill-fated effort to get the Olympics thought it was going to be a money-making proposition. It was going to be to the greater glory of the hub, which is important. Goodwill is really important. It would have been just a disaster in terms of how it would have impacted on all of us, unless, of course, you stay out here in the suburbs, which is a good idea. Maybe we'll move the whole university out here to the suburbs. I think someone at some point will say, let's just build a really nice place for the games in, I don't know, Athens. Wouldn't that be nice? Be pretty good for the Greek economy that could use some help. Will that happen? No. There are people like the Russians who want to show off bits and pieces of their country to the world. There are same problem with the World Cup. Imagine building all those stadiums. At least the sheiks in Qatar thought it was worth it, however much they illegally paid for it. Did I say that? No. They might have illegally paid for it, or so the rumors are. I think things will change with regard to international sports. Things always change. The question is whether they change for the better. We'll just have to see. Good. Oh, one more question. Last question. Yes.
Is there any way to get these sports teams to pay for their own stadiums, et cetera?
Well, I think there's a real problem. This will not come as a surprise. With greed. Greed is good, or so the owners say. And it was not always the case. Fenway Park was not built with state money. It was built as an attraction to sell the real estate that was owned by the owners of the Red Sox at the time. And they said, "Oh, we got to develop it." There's nothing else around, so they built the stadium with no input from the city. No one would have thought of it. I've written some on why states and counties and cities come up with $500 million or $1 billion to support the building of what is a private enterprise. They don't do that for Walmart. At least I don't think they do that for Walmart. But it's the same thing. A business is a business. I think that it doesn't make money for the community. The jobs are seasonal jobs, and they're low-paying jobs. Once you've built the complex, the construction unions love it for a while. Then they go on and build another public-supported stadium, and you just have to keep building new ones. They're building another one in Atlanta. Didn't they just finish one last week? They just keep building things. The politicians do it because it provides political value. No one has ever been defeated by coming up with public money to keep the club in town until we defeat them, and we can't defeat them. Economists are, to a person, agreeing that public support of private enterprise of rich billionaire owners simply doesn't make any sense. But I hope I've made some sense today, and if I can answer any questions, my email is on the Northeastern email list. Just look under the law school. I'm the first one, alphabetical, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions you have. It's all yours.